everyone, I'm Ari Meghlen here with Rachel Poli, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. We are on episode 57, and this week's question is, what's your favourite childhood story? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss a show, and if you enjoy our episode, please do give it a like. Yesterday, April 27th, was Tell a Story Day, so we thought it might be a good idea to talk about the importance of children's books and getting kids interested into reading at an early age. Especially since we don't have kids, so this is a great topic for us.
Here we go.
Who best to talk about kids' education and the importance of learning and reading for these little children when we have none ourselves?
Well, to be fair, I've been babysitting since I was 16, and I do have a college degree in early childhood education.
And I do have a young nephew and niece who I try to read to when they're not ripping pages out of books and flinging them across the room. So
perfect. We're totally qualified.
With that being said, today we are looking back at those stories from our childhood, especially if they helped you fall in love with storytelling. And in the true Merry Writer fashion, we will probably include more than one each, because that's what we do with everything. As I mentioned in the last episode, I really liked Winnie the Pooh when I was growing up, which is by A.A. Milne. Little known fact, I didn't realise that A.A. Milne was a male writer. I was so convinced it was a female writer for most of the time. My favourite was The House on Pooh Corner. And in fact, I do still have a copy of that book somewhere. It's very old and very tatty, but it is a piece of my childhood, so that's probably why I've never got rid of it. It was the book I used to reach for when I wanted a bedtime story, and even my older sister would often read passages of it at night, adding voices and everything. So it has a really poignant position in my childhood. And it's one of those books that, you know, it's been years and years and years since I read it, and I can still remember parts of it. And I could flick to certain page numbers that I always liked. So yeah, it's a little piece of treasure that I kept with me from my childhood.
That's so sweet. I love that your sister used to do voices. But I mean, Winnie the Pooh was something I was very much into as well. I don't know what it is about Winnie the Pooh, but there's just that Winnie the Pooh is just awesome. And to be honest, I don't remember too much of reading like any of the books of Winnie the Pooh. I know that I did have books, but I often watched the show and the movies. But the books I don't remember as much, but God, I love Winnie the Pooh. And I'm so mad that my nephews, we tried showing them Winnie the Pooh, but they just weren't into it. And I'm so mad at them for that.
That's like disowning level there.
Yeah, it
so
is.
Wrong.
It totally is. What I was super into as a kid was Little Bear. I don't know if you know that one, but that was another TV show that I watched a lot, but I did have books of a collection of stories of Little Bear, and Little Bear was just that. He was a little bear, and he would go on adventures with his friends, Duck and Cat, and they would learn life lessons and all that fun stuff. They would go on picnics together. I mean, it was very similar to Winnie the Pooh in some ways, except there was no Christopher Robin or anything like that. Although they did have a human female friend, which I cannot remember her name for the life of me. But yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, it's closer to Winnie the Pooh than I think. But Little Bear was another cute one.
No, I've never heard of that. Was that a show made in America?
I guess so.
Yeah, because we do get some shows and some books come over, but not everything. So sometimes I'll hear of things and I'm like, I've never heard of that. And then I find obviously it's a country thing. So it's like, try and get it over here.
All right, so I guess that answers that question. Winnie the Pooh is more popular than Little Bear. If any of you listening out there know Little Bear and used to read the books and watch the show, please let me know so that I'm not crazy. Little Bear was great. It was awesome.
It does sound quite cool because I just said, like, it sounds like Winnie the Pooh where they've got like a group of animals and they have adventures. It's like there's always a thing about that, isn't there? There's so many kids' books that have that where it's little animals doing something. I'm going to go off script at the moment. like a set of books I used to like was the Beatrix Potter books, which again is the same thing as it's all these little animal stories where you follow these, you know, Mrs. Tiggywinkle the Hedgehog, or Squirrel Nutkin, which by the way was my favorite. And all that. So obviously animals is a big thing to when getting kids into reading or playing or learning. It's like, you know, so I don't know, it's one of those things I always knew like intellectually, but I never really thought about it, that most little storybooks for kids have got like little animals in, not people. It's like,
yeah, and it's interesting too, because I don't know why we get so attracted to animals. Maybe it's because we're sick of humans, even as children. We don't like other humans. I don't know.
The only problem is I'm about to turn that on its head and say my next set of books I really liked were Roald Dahl stories, which often were just people. So going against my own comments there. I think those stories were in part so enjoyable because of Quentin Blake's awesome artwork. It's so recognizable. It just stands out. And I always remember, I'm just going to go off topic, when I was in primary school, there was like a safety leaflet that came out. We had like a massive number of like strange videos, and the police turned up to talk to us about the safety of not going on the railroad tracks. So I'm assuming someone did that and got hurt. So then they brought out all these leaflets, and I remember the artwork was by Quentin Blake, and it was really hard to take seriously because it had those silly characters like being electrocuted. This is suddenly becoming a really dark episode. But it was like, you know, don't go on the tracks because the electricity can still hurt, you know, like it looks like there's nothing, but if you touch things, it can hurt you. And it was designed to do that. But I just remember it, I don't think it had the same effect it was going for because it had this really silly, recognizable art style. But anyway, I digress again. Yeah, my three favorite books of Roald Dahl's would have to be Fantastic Mr. Fox, because I do like my animals, The Twits, I don't know why, I just really love that, and George's Marvelous Medicine.
I never read any of those stories. I've heard of them, but I've never read any of them.
I'm speechless. And
yeah, I know. When I was a kid, I wasn't as into reading,
right, yeah,
as I am now. Because back in the day, they would always assign you books to read in school, and I never cared too much for those books because one, the content would go over my head, even though it was written for my age group, or it was just the fact that it was homework and it was for school. I just wanted nothing to do with it. Like, I didn't actually really truly start reading until I got to college.
I think that says it all, because you said like it's the books that they assigned you, and I don't know what it is about teachers, but they always seem to assign the most boring books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even they're fiction, but there's always something really dull about them. They're like the worst stories ever, and it's like they don't have to be the most exciting, but there are pretty decent stories out there that they could have used to do the life lesson and the moral compass that we all need when we're younger. But they always seem to pick the most boring, dull things, and then we all had to read them out in class, and it's like, no thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is too, like, there were a few books that I had to read in high school that, you know, a few years later in college or outside of college, I picked them up and I read them myself, and they were actually pretty good books, and I appreciated the content more because I understood it. But even those books are targeted for high schoolers at the time, I was not, I don't know, mature enough might be the right word. I wasn't mature enough to actually care about the content or to fully understand the content. Yeah, I don't know. I think at an early age, like elementary school and even middle school, like, they shouldn't be assigning books. They should just tell the kids to read.
Yeah.
Just find a book that has some sort of content that you're interested in it and just read it. That's the best way you can get practice out of it. I mean, I know I just said that I didn't really start reading until I was in college, but there was a middle grade series that I really got into when I was in 6th grade. And I know I've talked about this before on the podcast and off the podcast, but Warriors by Erin Hunter is a series that really got me into reading when I was 11 years old. The first book came out and the series is still going on. I'm still reading the series. If you guys follow my blog, you know that I'm still reviewing the books on there. And it's an awesome series. And again, back to the animals. It's a book about cats, and they have other series. They have Survivors, which is about dogs. They have Seekers, which are about bears. Yeah, those are the only books that I read when I was in middle school going through high school, was that middle grade series. And then I got to college, and then I started branching out into other books, but I'm still reading Warriors.
That's incredible though that it's still going on. That's like, is these stories and these books that you've read when you were a child and they're still happening. It's like, talk about longevity. That author knew what she was doing. And,
Authors.
authors.
It's a fun name. There's 3 people writing the series.
Ah, that's clever.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's broke. I don't know what the right term is. Like, you know how a trilogy is 3 books, a duology is 2 books, but each series is in 6 books, and then they come out with another series, and that's 6 books, and so on. And after the second series, they wanted to stop it, but the publisher said no. And I think now they're on like their 6th or 7th series, if I'm counting correctly in my head. And you times that by 6 books, and then they have special editions. They even have manga out for it, and it's crazy.
That's impressive, although I have to say, I would be really pissed if I turned around and said, I don't want to write this series anymore, and some publisher was like, no, you have to. It's like, whoa, are you telling me what I can and can't do? But obviously, it's done really well, and I'm sure they feel probably very happy with it now. So
yeah. I'm enjoying it, so
I might have to look into that, because I never heard of them until you mentioned them, and I have seen your reviews, and they do look good. And also, I do still like reading the odd book that's got animals in it, so I can imagine. But the other problem is I would probably get hooked, and then I'd just be like, that's it. It's like, where's the next one? Where's the next one?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have a lot to catch up with.
Yeah, oh, great. I'll just add more to the TBR list that's already.
But hey, they're middle grade books, so you'll get through them fast.
I think one of the things we're talking about with this podcast is how important it is for kids to get into reading. And I personally do like the idea of reading to kids, especially when they're young, especially when they can't read themselves. It's a good way of learning, you know, like have the child next to you while you're reading along and everything. I do remember getting a lot of enjoyment from that and getting kids really interested in books. No, we're not just saying that because we're writers and we obviously want to keep the audience going. It's like, got to keep the fans going for while we get older and older. No, it really is good to get them into it. And obviously, you know, the next generation, we need more writers, because it's always awesome to have more writers in the world. And, you know, there's always more books that we want to read. And I do think it's important to get them into reading and to read to them. And just to pull them into those stories and spark their imagination. Even if they end up not being big readers, they can take those imagination sparks and do something else with it. But yeah, I think the fact that it was Tell a Story Day yesterday was quite poignant, because I don't know, I've been thinking about this more and more. As I said, I have a niece and nephew who are quite young, and unfortunately with the pandemic, I have not been able to see them other than like standing on the road, like waving from a really long distance, because obviously they're small children and they want to run to you, and you want to have that distance enough to keep them from getting too close. And it is noticeable when you can't go over and read their favorite book, or, you know, listen to Baby Shark for the 4 billionth time. So I'm starting to remember why I like this pandemic. But yeah, it's nice to think of our audience, and even if you don't write children's books, it's nice to think of the audience coming up, because the more we get kids into reading, the more that when they grow older, they might like your books, you know? So see, in the end, it's all about getting people to buy your books. I swear that wasn't where I was going.
But no, I do agree with you, like, because it does help spark that imagination. Because I have met some kids that they don't play, like they don't use their imagination. Like as I said earlier, I've been babysitting since I was 16 years old, so it's been, I don't know, math, 11 years, I don't know. And I have babysat for quite a few families, because obviously kids get older and then they don't need a babysitter anymore, so I move on to a new family. And I have had a couple of kids where they were so logic-based or academic-based, and they didn't know how to use their imagination, and they always thought I was crazy. And I was like, this is how you play. We're gonna have fun, okay? But reading helps spark that imagination, as you said, and it also gives them an escape from reality for a little bit too, because kids have plenty of stressors in their life, just like adults do. They just do a better job at handling it. And like allowing them to get into a book that has some content that they're really, really into can really just opens so many doors for them. And whether they become an avid reader or not, or whether they become a writer or not, like it just shows them all these different opportunities. And yeah, sure, it could be about unicorns, and depending on who you ask, unicorns don't exist, but it still gives them, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it gives them something.
Yes.
And I guess that something is different for everybody.
Definitely. Well, I think you see a lot of people where it's like, I've read articles from people saying like, oh, you should read like, so many books a year, and but they shouldn't be fiction. You get a lot of these like high-powered corporate people. It's like, oh no, don't read fiction. It's a waste of time. You should read all these, how to make millions and how to be productive and blah blah blah. And it's like, to me, you miss a trick if you don't read fiction. It's like, do you think that people who became engineers and came up with things like, and I'm just going to pick this silly random thing, the robot vacuum, would have come up with something as cool as that if they hadn't read or watched sci-fi? A lot of the things that are coming out of like engineering and technology are things you could literally go back to certain books and certain movies, and it's like, oh, look, there it is. And then they made it happen. It's like, sometimes you get a spark of something in somebody else's imagination. They write a story, they write a movie, whatever, and then someone down the line goes, you know what, we need that. And then they take the imaginative thing and they create it in real life.
Yeah.
So it's not just a case of, well, you read fiction and you either become a writer and that's it. But no, there's so many different paths you can take those imaginations. It's not just like, oh yes, I'm going to create this one thing. It's like, no, you could be an engineer, you could be a scientist. You just need to think differently, and reading can help that. Stories can help that. They can also help you get through traumas and situations that you're maybe personally going through. Someone may have written about characters divorcing and how it affects the children. And if you're a child going through the family breakup, it might be helpful to read that and understand in a fictional way. So I don't know, I think most people do understand how important reading is, but I don't always think it's almost kind of like, well, you should read because then it helps your language skills. It's like, that's one of the aspects it can do.
Yes, it's just like, one of the many.
Yeah, it's it does need to be more than just, well, it'll help you structure things, it'll help you understand words and context better. It's like, yeah, but there's more. So yeah, that's why we say definitely do more reading. And just on a point, like I have a family member who is dyslexic, and that's one of the reasons why I like things like comic books and graphic novels, because I found that a number of people who have dyslexia find it easier to read comics because of the shorter dialogue and then the visual. So they're not struggling as, obviously every dyslexic is different and some people might struggle, but that's why I like the idea that you shouldn't penalize someone for what they read. It shouldn't be a case of, oh, why are you not reading War and Peace? Why are you reading, one of the Marvel comics? It's like, you shouldn't penalize someone for what they're reading, because they're reading, and that's important. And that might just be the best thing for them, the best system for them. I know people who still prefer to read books that have got artwork in them, like that kind of, where you got like a picture and that, so they have like almost like a visual aid for what they're reading. I know some people prefer more simple books, no matter how old they get. They don't want anything too complex. I've tried to read some of these big tome books. I can't get through them. They're too much for me. So I go back to the stuff I'm okay with. And that doesn't make me any worse for not reading, these giant classic books that everyone's supposed to read. So yeah, can we at least not judge or shame anyone for if someone only likes to read comic books or someone only likes to read YA, no matter what their age? It really doesn't matter.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mostly read cozy mysteries, which are a simple read for the most part, and middle grade books. I don't read too many adult books. I used to read a lot of YA, but I don't read YA as much anymore. But my favorite is middle grade. I don't know why. At 27 years old, I don't know why I revert back to books for 10, 11-year-olds, but that's what I enjoy, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I will say this, though, I totally agree with you that, reading is reading no matter what, whether it has pictures or it's a graphic novel or, even audiobooks. People argue that audiobooks doesn't count as reading. It counts as reading. But I will have to say, that the 8-year-old that I babysit for right now, for the past couple of months, we've been reading books together, because part of her homework is that she needs to read about 15 to 20 minutes a night, and she has to write a reading log and basically summarize what she read. And she's always done this on her own, but she always gravitates towards graphic novels. Like, she'll read the Babysitter's Club graphic novels, or, like Captain Underpants and, things like that. And again, there is nothing wrong with these books, but I started reading these books with her because we alternate reading chapters to each other. So she's still reading. We make it more fun because I started doing voices, so then she started doing voices, and so it takes us a long time to read. But the reason I started doing that is because she's going to be in 4th grade next year, so she won't have a reading log anymore, but her teacher is going to begin. That's when they start assigning books for them to read on their own for school, and at the end of it, they'll have to do a book report or a short essay or something like that. And I noticed that whenever once we finish one book for her reading log and she chooses the next book, she'll pick up a book that she has or a new book that she just got. And if it doesn't have any pictures in it, if it's all just chapters, it's not the fact that she gets intimidated by it without having those pictures there, which I totally understand, especially at her age. But I don't want her to go into 4th grade being intimidated by these books and having homework be a struggle.
Yes.
Because as I explained earlier, I was not into reading at all when I was a kid because of these books. And granted, as I also said that I read some of them when I was older, and I did enjoy these books. But at that age, you don't have if you're not interested in it, you're just not going to like it. You might not even comprehend it. And then she ends up falling far behind. So I agree with you, reading graphic novels, there's nothing wrong with it. If that's what you like, that's what you like. And by all means, buy all the graphic novels. But at such a young age, you do need to dabble in different things just to get them comfortable with all these different styles so that they can choose what style they prefer, what genre they prefer, and things like that. And because, I know we were just talking about books, they're for imagination and things like that, creativity, but it does help with the language learning and things like that. So there is, I know I'm going back and forth here, but I don't know. Books are intense. Reading is intense. This whole episode just got it's so much deeper than I thought it would be.
Yeah, we just tacked off on a totally different thing.
Yep.
No, you're totally right. It's there's, especially as you said, in schools, you will get assigned books that are probably things you will never want to read. Yeah. And you have to read them, and which is totally fine. And you should kind of get used to have to deal with that. Obviously, if you're out of school and you want to do something else, it's you shouldn't be penalized or punished or judged for reading certain things, especially if you find it more easy. But definitely, as Rachel said, it is important to try different things, and because that's it, you might get thinking, I could never read that, or that's too intense, or even, I don't want to read a book with pictures, and actually it could be a really good read that you would probably love. So definitely read wide. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, and with that deep dive into reading that we weren't expecting to say, I think we'll end the episode. So we really hope you enjoyed it, and do let us know what your favourite childhood story was. We'd love to hear about it. Put it in the comments or on Twitter using the hashtag #TheMerryWriterPodcast. If you do want to get yourself some extra content, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/TheMerryWriterPodcast. You can support our show for as little as $1 a month and get yourself some bonus content. Tune in next week for another episode of the Merry Writer Podcast, where we ask all the right questions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Excessive Caffeine. We drink a lot. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.